The winter of 1887 was the harshest the Colorado Rockies had seen in decades. As the Northern Pacific locomotive trudged through the mounting snowdrifts, its whistle piercing the frigid air, none of its passengers could have predicted how this journey would forever alter the course of two strangers' lives. A desperate young widow carrying not just the weight of her unborn child, but the burden of poverty and grief. A Cherokee hunter, tracking game through the storm, following ancestral paths through mountains that held no mercy for the unprepared. Their paths would cross in the most unlikely of circumstances, a chance encounter born of cruelty that would spark an unexpected bond stronger than the blizzard that threatened to claim them both. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eliza Harmon clutched her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying desperately to shield herself from the biting cold that seeped through the train car's poorly sealed windows. Her fingers, red and nearly numb, absent-mindedly traced circles over the small, firm swell of her belly. 5 months along now, the last living piece of Thomas she had left in this world. The Sierra Pass Railroad didn't typically run this route in January, but the mining companies had paid handsomely to ensure supplies and workers could reach the boomtown of Silverdale before the mountain passes became completely impassable. Eliza had used nearly every penny she had to her name to secure passage on this train, a desperate gamble to reach her cousin Sarah in Denver before her condition made travel impossible. Thomas had been dead just 3 months. The mine collapse had taken him and 11 other men in an instant, leaving Eliza alone in a town that offered little charity to the widows it created with such regularity. She'd received no compensation. The mining company claimed Thomas had been working against regulations, though the other miners whispered it was a faulty support beam that had given way. "Tickets, ma'am!" The conductor's gruff voice startled her from her thoughts. He was a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed mustache, his uniform pressed despite the harsh conditions of the journey. His eyes narrowed as they settled on her. Worn dress and the small bundle of possessions tucked beneath her seat. Eliza's heart sank as she reached into her pocket. The ticket she'd purchased should have been there. She remembered holding it tightly in her hand as she boarded. But as her fingers searched frantically, finding only loose threads and empty space, panic rose in her throat. I had it when I boarded, sir. It must have fallen out," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the rumbling of the train's wheels against the tracks. The conductor's face hardened. "That's what they all say, ma'am. Ticket or payment, or you'll be removed." "At the next stop, please," Eliza whispered. "I've paid all I had. I'm traveling to Denver, to my cousin's home. I'm with my child and have nowhere else to go." His eyes flicked down to her belly, then back up to her face, unmoved. "Rules are rules. Without a ticket, you're stealing from the Sierra Pass Railroad Company." Eliza fumbled through her small bag, hoping against hope to find something of value. A silver brooch, her mother's, fell into her palm. "Would this cover the fare? That's all I have left." The conductor took the brooch, turning it over in his calloused hands before pocketing it. "Not nearly enough for passage to Denver." "Then, how far will it take me?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Oak Ridge Station, next stop." His tone left no room for negotiation as he moved on to the next passenger. Eliza fought back tears. Oak Ridge was little more than a water stop for the trains, a tiny outpost with no town nearby. And with the storm growing fiercer by the hour, being left there would be a death sentence. 20 minutes later, the train began to slow. Through the frost-covered window, Eliza could make out nothing but swirling snow and the faint outline of a small platform. "No buildings, no lights, just wilderness. This is your stop." The conductor appeared again, this time accompanied by a younger man, the train's guard. "Sir, please." Eliza tried one final appeal. "The storm. I'm a child. I won't survive." "Out there. You should have thought of that before trying to steal a ride," he replied coldly. "Now you can walk off with dignity, or we can assist you." Pride was a luxury Eliza could not afford. She grabbed her small bundle and stood, legs shaking with fear more than cold. The other passengers studiously avoided her gaze. No one willing to intervene, no one willing to challenge the authority of the railroad. The wind struck her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the platform, the train's warmth vanishing instantly. She turned back, hoping for some last-minute act of mercy, but the guard had already closed the door. Within moments, the train was moving again, disappearing into the white void of the blizzard, leaving nothing but silence and the howl of the wind. Eliza stood frozen, both literally and in shock. The platform had no shelter, no woodpile, nothing, but a small sign bearing the name Oak Ridge Station that creaked and swung in the wind. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling faster. Night would come early in the mountains, and with it, temperatures that no one, especially not a pregnant woman with inadequate clothing, could survive. Survival instinct took over. There had to be something, some direction, some shelter. The railroad tracks disappeared into the forest to the east and west. To the north rose the imposing peaks of the Rockies, impassable in this weather. The only option was south, where the land seemed to slope downward into a valley of pine forest. Drawing her shawl over her head and clutching her bundle to her chest, Eliza stepped off the platform and into the wilderness. The first half hour was pure determination. Each step sank deeper into the accumulating snow, and the wind seemed to change direction constantly, always finding a way to cut through her thin clothing. But Eliza kept moving, one foot in front of the other, focusing on the rhythm of her steps rather than the growing numbness in her extremities. An hour in, exhaustion began to set in. The adrenaline of her ordeal on the train had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep fatigue that made each step more difficult than the last. The forest had grown denser, providing some shelter from the wind, but making navigation nearly impossible in the fading light. It was then that she felt it, a flutter, a small movement within her womb, the baby, her child, Thomas's child. The tiny reminder of life jolted her forward with renewed purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. As twilight descended, transforming the white landscape into deepening shades of blue and grey, Eliza spotted a large fallen pine, its massive trunk creating a small windbreak against the storm. It wasn't much, but it was the first potential shelter she'd encountered. Stumbling toward it, she collapsed in the small, protected pocket created by the tree's exposed roots. The relative stillness was a momentary relief, but Eliza knew it wouldn't be enough. Without fire, without proper shelter, the night would claim her and her unborn child. The knowledge should have brought despair, but instead it brought clarity. She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving until she found real shelter or help. Rising on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her, Eliza pressed on into the deepening gloom. Benjamin Wolfe had been tracking the elk for 3 days. The massive bull had led him far from his usual hunting grounds, deep into territory that even the Cherokee rarely ventured during winter. But the harsh season had been hard on his people, and the meat from one such animal could feed many families. At the reservation for weeks, Benjamin was 32, born to a Cherokee mother and white father, though he'd been raised entirely within the tribe after his father abandoned them when he was just an infant. He learned the traditional ways of hunting and tracking from his grandfather, skills that had served him well as the tribe's fortunes diminished with each passing year and each broken government promise. The storm had caught him by surprise. Not in its arrival, which he'd sensed coming days ago, but in its intensity. The elk's trail had grown increasingly difficult to follow as the snow covered its tracks almost as quickly as they were made. By mid-afternoon, Benjamin had made the reluctant decision to abandon the hunt and find shelter until the worst of the blizzard passed. He knew these mountains well enough to understand that open areas were death traps in such weather. The forest provided some protection, but what he needed was a cave, an outcropping, or one of the old trapper cabins that dotted these remote regions. There was one such cabin, if memory serves, near the place where Elk Creek joined the wider Wolf River, perhaps 3 miles southeast of his current position. The snow fell in sheets now, visibility reduced to mere yards, but Benjamin's sense of direction remained steady. He moved with purpose through the forest, his deerskin coat and fur-lined boots providing far better protection than Eliza's town clothes. Still, even he felt the deadly bite of the cold, attempting to work its way into his bones. It was the anomaly that caught his attention first. Something out of place in the natural patterns of the forest. A splash of darker color against the endless white. Benjamin paused, narrowing his eyes against the swirling snow. There, perhaps 50 yards ahead, something was moving, something that didn't belong in these woods. Instinct told him to approach with caution. Predators grew desperate in such weather, and wounded animals were unpredictable. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something entirely unexpected, a human figure stumbling blindly through the deepening snow. Benjamin quickened his pace, closing the distance rapidly. It was a woman, he realized with shock. A white woman here, miles from any settlement in the middle of a killing blizzard. She moved like someone in the final stages of cold exposure, uncoordinated, lurching, barely staying upright. "Hello?" he called out, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "Stop! Stay where you are!" The figure turned toward his voice, revealing a face so pale it nearly matched the snow, lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, locked onto his for just a moment before she crumpled forward, into the snow. Benjamin reached her in seconds, turning her carefully onto her back. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and as he moved to lift her, he noticed the swell of her abdomen beneath her inadequate clothing. Pregnant. The realization sent a surge of urgency through him. Not one life at stake, but 2. He checked quickly for obvious injuries, but found none, just the deadly cold that had nearly claimed her. Without hesitation, Benjamin shrugged off his outer coat and wrapped it around her, then gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fact that concerned him almost as much as her pallor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his face close to hers to be heard over the storm. "I'm going to help you. There's shelter not far from here." Her eyelids fluttered, a faint moan escaping her blue lips. It wasn't much, but it told him she was still alive, still fighting. The cabin was now his only hope, not just his anymore, but hers and her unborn child's as well. Benjamin adjusted his grip on the woman and set off at the fastest pace he dared, hyper-aware of the precious burden in his arms and the rapidly fading daylight. The storm seemed to fight him with every step, the wind changing direction to always be in his face, the snow deepening treacherously beneath his feet. But Benjamin had survived worse, had learned from childhood that nature was neither malicious nor benevolent, merely indifferent. It was human will against elemental force, and he refused to yield. After what felt like hours, but was likely less than 1, Benjamin spotted the dark outline of the cabin through the curtain of snow. Relief surged through him, tempered immediately by concern for the woman in his arms, who had grown alarmingly still. The trapper's cabin was small but solidly built, constructed decades ago by fur traders who understood the unforgiving nature of mountain winters. Benjamin shifted the woman's weight to free one hand, brushing snow from the door before pushing it open. Inside was cold and dark, but blessedly free from wind and falling snow. Benjamin gently laid the woman on the single narrow cot against the far wall, then moved quickly to address their most urgent need: fire. The cabin's previous occupants had left a small stack of firewood beside the stone hearth, along with kindling and flint, a courtesy among those who traversed these remote areas. Benjamin worked with practiced efficiency, arranging the kindling, striking the flint, nursing the small flame until it caught and began to grow. Only when the fire was crackling steadily did he return his attention to the woman in the growing light. Her condition appeared even more dire. Her skin had the waxy appearance of severe cold exposure, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Benjamin knew the protocols for treating someone in such a state. First, remove wet clothing, an uncomfortable necessity that couldn't be avoided. With clinical detachment, he removed her snow-soaked outer garments, leaving her in her underclothes for modesty, and wrapped her in the cabin's stored blankets. Rough wool, but dry and warming rapidly in proximity to the fire. Next, gradual warming. Too rapid could shock her system. He positioned her on the cot at a carefully calculated distance from the hearth, close enough to benefit from its heat, but not so near as to warm too quickly. As he worked, the woman began to stir, consciousness returning in painful increments. Her eyes, a deep brown that appeared almost black in the flickering firelight, opened and fixed on him with confusion and fear. "Who?" she managed, her voice barely audible. "My name is Benjamin Wolfe," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I found you in the forest during the storm. You're safe now. This is an old trapper's cabin." "The train," she whispered, fragments of memory returning. "They put me off the train." Benjamin's brow furrowed. "In this weather? For what reason?" "No ticket," she said, a single tear escaping to trace a path down her temple. "I had one, but lost it. They wouldn't believe me." Anger flashed through Benjamin, a controlled burn he'd learned long ago to contain. He'd encountered the casual cruelty of the railroad companies before, seen how they treated those they deemed unimportant. But to put a pregnant woman off, a train in a blizzard that bordered on murder. "What's your name?" he asked, pushing aside his anger to focus on what mattered. "Eliza," she replied, her voice slightly stronger. "Eliza Harmon." "You're with child," Benjamin stated simply. Her hands moved protectively to her belly. "5 months along. My husband." Her voice caught. "Thomas died in a mining accident 3 months ago. I was trying to reach my cousin in Denver." The cabin grew quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. Benjamin moved to the cabin's small cupboard, finding, as he'd hoped, some basic provisions left by previous occupants. Jerky, beans, coffee, and a pot to heat water. "You need to eat something," he said, setting water to boil over the fire. "Just a little at first, then rest." Eliza watched him work, wariness gradually giving way to tentative trust. What choice did she have? This stranger, this Cherokee man, had saved her life, and by extension, her child's. Without him, she would already be buried beneath the snow, another nameless victim of the mountain's harsh indifference. "Thank you," she said simply, "for finding me." Benjamin nodded once, acknowledgement without need for elaboration. "The storm will last through tomorrow. Maybe longer. We're safe here until it passes." As he prepared a simple meal from the stored provisions, Benjamin studied Eliza surreptitiously. Color was returning to her face, a good sign, and her breathing had steadied. But there was something in her eyes that spoke of a resilience that had nothing to do with physical recovery. a determination that had likely kept her moving long after others would have surrendered to the cold. Outside, the blizzard raged on, snow piling higher against the cabin's walls, wind finding the smallest gaps between logs to whistle through. But inside, a fragile sanctuary had formed. Two strangers brought together by circumstance, facing a long night in a wilderness that forgave no mistakes. As darkness claimed the world beyond their shelter, neither could guess how their unexpected meeting would change the course of their lives, nor the challenges that awaited them when the storm finally cleared. Dawn arrived as a subtle lightening of the gloom, the blizzard showing no signs of abating. Benjamin had maintained the fire through the night, alternating between light sleep and vigilance. Eliza had fallen into an exhausted slumber shortly after consuming a small amount of food, her body desperately working to recover from its ordeal. As morning light filtered weakly through the cabin's single small window, Benjamin rose quietly to check their supplies. The previous occupants had left enough firewood to last perhaps 2 more days if they were careful. The food situation was more concerning. Enough for several meals, but not for an extended stay. If the storm continued, beyond tomorrow, they would face difficult choices. A soft sound from the cot drew his attention. Eliza was awake, watching him with eyes more alert than they had been the previous evening. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, pushing herself up to sitting position, the blankets clutched protectively around her. "Nearly 12 hours. Benjamin replied, adding wood to the fire. "Your body needed it." Eliza's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen. "The baby. I felt it move during the night. I think we're all right." Benjamin nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "That's good. Are you hungry? There's not much, but we should keep your strength up." "Yes, thank you." Her voice was stronger today, though still carrying the weight of her recent trauma, as Benjamin heated water for coffee and prepared a meager breakfast of jerky and dried beans softened overnight. Eliza took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small but sturdy, perhaps 15 feet square, with rough-hewn log walls chinked with mud and moss. Besides the cot where she lay, there was a small table with a single chair, shelves holding a few tools and supplies, and the stone hearth that dominated one wall. "Have you been out here hunting?" she asked, accepting a tin cup of strong black coffee with gratitude. Benjamin nodded. "Tracking an elk. My people at the reservation could use the meat." "You live on a reservation. Which tribe?" Eliza found herself genuinely curious. Her knowledge of native peoples limited to what she'd read in newspapers, usually accounts of conflicts or treaties, rarely the day-to-day realities. "Cherokee," he replied. "Eastern Band. Many of our people walked the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, but some remained in the mountains, hiding until the soldiers left. My grandfather was one of them." Eliza absorbed this information silently. The Trail of Tears. She'd heard of it, though details were sparse in the history books she'd studied. A forced migration, thousands dead. Yet here sat a descendant of those who had resisted, who had survived against all odds, just as she now fought to survive. "And now?" she asked. "Now we live where the government tells us to live, on land they decide is worthless enough to give us." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. "I hunt, I trap, I trade. Some of our young men work for the railroads or in the mines." The mention of mines brought Thomas sharply back to Eliza's mind. His smile, his hands always coal-stained despite scrubbing, his dreams of saving enough to buy a small farm someday, dreams buried beneath tons of rock and earth. "My husband was a miner," she said quietly. "In Silverdale, there was a collapse." Benjamin met her eyes across the small space. "I'm sorry. The mining companies take much and give little in return." A shared understanding passed between them, two people from vastly different worlds who nonetheless recognized the same injustice. The moment stretched, then broke as a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin's shutters. The storm isn't letting up, Benjamin observed, moving to the window to assess conditions. We should prepare to stay at least another day, maybe two. Eliza nodded, trying to quell the anxiety that rose at the thought of further delay. Her cousin in Denver would be expecting her soon, would worry when she didn't arrive. And her meager funds, already depleted by the train ticket she'd lost, wouldn't stretch far once she reached the city. I need to find a way to send word to my cousin, she said, once we reach civilization again. There's a telegraph office in Pine Hollow, Benjamin replied. It's the nearest settlement, about 15 miles south of here. Once the storm passes, that's where we'll head. 15 miles. Under normal circumstances, an arduous journey, but manageable. For a woman 5 months pregnant, recovering from near freezing through snow-covered mountain terrain, it would be a trial unlike any Eliza had faced before. I'll slow you down, she said, voicing the concern that weighed on her. You could reach Pine Hollow much faster alone. Benjamin's expression remained unchanged. I won't leave you behind. We go together or not at all. The simple declaration, delivered without drama or expectation of gratitude, touched something deep within Eliza. In a world that had shown her little kindness since Thomas's death, this stranger's steadfast resolve was like finding solid ground after months of sinking sand. Thank you, she said simply. The day passed slowly, marked by the unchanging howl of the wind and the regular ritual of tending the fire. Benjamin repaired a tear in his hunting pack, while Eliza, feeling strong enough to move around the cabin, took inventory of their supplies and organized them more efficiently. Conversation came in sporadic bursts, sometimes about practical matters, sometimes venturing into personal territory. Eliza learned that Benjamin had never married, though he'd been engaged once to a woman from his tribe who had died of influenza 4 years earlier. Benjamin learned that Eliza had been a schoolteacher before marrying Thomas, and that she hoped to find similar work in Denver if her cousin could help with the baby. What will you name the child? Benjamin asked as they shared a small evening meal, carefully rationed to extend their provisions. Eliza smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face, revealing the woman she had been before grief and hardship had worn her down. If it's a boy, Thomas, after his father. If a girl, Grace, after my grandmother. Good names, Benjamin approved. Strong names. As night fell again, Benjamin insisted Eliza keep the cot while he made a pallet of blankets near the fire. Despite her protests that she'd already taken his coat and his bed, he remained firm. You need proper rest more than I do, he said, ending the discussion. The second night passed much like the first, though Eliza slept more fitfully, her mind racing with concerns about the journey ahead and the uncertainty awaiting her in Denver. Several times she awoke to find Benjamin awake as well, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he stared thoughtfully into the flames. By morning, a noticeable change had occurred. The wind had died down. The constant pattern of snow against the roof had ceased. Benjamin opened the cabin door to reveal a transformed world, pristine white stretching in every direction, tree branches bowing under the weight of accumulated snow. But above, patches of blue sky were visible between slowly dispersing clouds. The storm has passed, he announced, relief evident in his voice. We should prepare to leave as soon as possible. Daylight is valuable this time of year. The preparation was quick but thorough. Benjamin packed what remained of their supplies, fashioned a walking stick for Eliza from a straight branch he'd used for firewood, and made sure the cabin was left, in good order for the next travelers who might need its shelter. Eliza's clothing had dried near the fire, though it remained woefully inadequate for the conditions. Benjamin solved this by sacrificing one of the cabin's blankets, cutting a hole in the center to create a poncho and securing it around her waist with rope. It was crude, but would provide an extra layer of protection against the cold. "The snow will make travel difficult," he warned, as they stood ready to depart. "Follow in my footsteps exactly. If you need to rest, tell me immediately. Don't wait." "Until you're exhausted," Eliza nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. "I'm ready." Stepping out into the snow was like entering another world. The storm had left behind nearly 3 feet of fresh powder, transforming familiar landscapes into alien terrain. Benjamin led the way, breaking trail with methodical determination, each step a labor that carved a path for Eliza to follow. The first hour tested Eliza's resolve to its limits. Every muscle protested, her lungs burned with each breath of frigid air, and her feet, protected only by her town boots, quickly grew numb despite the extra socks Benjamin had insisted she wear. But she pressed on, focusing on placing each foot exactly where Benjamin had stepped before her. Their progress was agonizingly slow, perhaps a mile in that first hour, but steady. Benjamin set a sustainable pace, aware that speed mattered less than endurance. He stopped often, ostensibly to check their direction or listen for signs of wildlife, but Eliza suspected these pauses were as much for her benefit as for any practical purpose. By midday they had covered perhaps 3 miles, following the gradual descent toward the valley where Pine Hollow lay. The sun emerged fully, its brightness against the snow nearly blinding, but its warmth a welcome relief on their faces. During a brief rest, sharing the last of the jerky from the cabin, Eliza noticed Benjamin's frequent glances toward the northwest, where dark clouds were beginning to gather above the distant peaks. "Another storm?" she asked, dread coloring her voice. "Not for several hours yet," he replied. "But it's coming. We need to find better shelter before nightfall." The urgency lent them renewed energy. They pushed on through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they descended. Fewer pines, more aspen and scrub oak, the snow depth slightly less challenging. Eliza found her second wind, settling into a rhythm of movement that, while still exhausting, felt sustainable. It was during this period of relative calm that Benjamin suddenly raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. He stood motionless, head tilted, listening intently. "What is it?" Eliza whispered, instinctively keeping her voice low. "Water," he answered. "Running water." Following him through a dense thicket of bare aspens, Eliza emerged onto the bank of a narrow creek, its surface partially frozen, but with a strong current still flowing beneath the ice and snow. "Wolf Creek," Benjamin confirmed. "We're on the right path. Pine Hollow lies where this creek joins the larger river, about 10 miles downstream." 10 miles. So far, yet so close. Eliza's spirits lifted slightly at the concrete evidence of their progress. The creek provided a natural path to follow, its course cutting a route through the wilderness that avoided the steepest terrain. They continued alongside it, moving with renewed purpose as the afternoon began to wane and the approaching storm clouds grew more ominous. It was Benjamin who spotted the cabin first, a small structure set back from the creek, nearly invisible, against the backdrop of snow-covered pines. Unlike the trapper's cabin, where they'd weathered the blizzard, this one showed signs of more regular occupation. A woodpile under a lean-to, a small corral for livestock, though empty now. "A miner's claim cabin," Benjamin explained as they approached cautiously. "Used during prospecting season, probably empty now in winter." He was right. The cabin was unoccupied, though better furnished than their previous shelter. A proper bed instead of a cot, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove rather than an open hearth, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "Should we stay?" Eliza asked, torn between relief at finding shelter and concern about using someone else's property. "We have no choice. The storm will hit within hours," Benjamin replied, already moving to light the stove. "Prospectors understand mountain survival. No one would begrudge shelter in these circumstances." As Benjamin prepared the cabin, Eliza explored its single room, finding small comforts that seemed luxurious after their journey: a basin for washing, a shelf of books, even a small mirror hanging on one wall. She caught sight of her reflection and barely recognized herself. Face wind-burned and chapped, hair tangled beneath her makeshift head covering, eyes bright with exhaustion and determination. 5 days ago, she had been a pregnant widow on a train, hoping for nothing more than safe passage to her cousin's home. Now she was a survivor, navigating a wilderness she'd never imagined with the help of a man who, by all social conventions, should have been a stranger to her world. Yet here they were, bound together by circumstance and mutual need. "There's plenty of food here," Benjamin called, breaking into her thoughts. "Beans, rice, salt pork. We won't go hungry tonight." The simple pleasure of a hot meal cooked on a proper stove lifted both their spirits. As they ate, sitting at the table like civilized people rather than huddled near a fire, Eliza felt a moment of normalcy that had been absent since Thomas's death. "How much farther to Pine Hollow?" she asked, savoring the last bite of her meal. "If the weather holds, we could reach it by tomorrow afternoon," Benjamin replied. "But this storm may delay us." As if in response to his words, the wind picked up outside, whistling around the cabin's corners. The approaching front had arrived, bringing with it not snow this time, but a freezing rain that drummed against the roof and windows. "Ice storm," Benjamin observed grimly. "Worse than snow for traveling. Everything becomes treacherous." The change in weather confined them to the cabin, but with adequate supplies and a solid roof overhead, their situation was far less precarious than it had been. Benjamin spent the evening checking their gear and planning their route for the next day, while Eliza, finding needle and thread among the cabin's provisions, set about repairing tears in their clothing. As night settled fully around them, a comfortable silence filled the small space, the kind that exists between people who have faced danger together and emerged stronger for it. Eliza realized that despite the circumstances, despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead, she felt safe in Benjamin's presence, not just physically protected, but understood in a way few people had ever truly understood her. The miner's cabin had only one bed, but it was large enough that Benjamin suggested they share it, placing a blanket down the middle as a symbolic division. Eliza, too exhausted to argue and trusting him completely by now, agreed without hesitation. As they lay in the darkness, listening to the ice pellets striking the roof, Eliza's thoughts drifted to Pine Hollow and what awaited them there. Would the townspeople be welcoming to a Cherokee man accompanying a white woman? Would there be a way to send word to her cousin? Would she find the means to continue her journey to Denver? "Benjamin," she said softly, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes?" His voice came from the darkness beside her. "What will you do after we reach Pine Hollow?" The silence stretched long enough that Eliza thought he might not answer. "Return to the reservation, eventually," he finally replied. "But first, make sure you're safely on your way to Denver." The simple declaration of commitment touched her deeply. "You've already done so much. You don't need to—" "I know," he cut her off gently. "But I will." Another silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and growing awareness of a connection neither had anticipated. Outside, the storm intensified, ice giving way to heavy snow once more, nature's reminder of how tenuous their safety remained in this harsh landscape. For now, though, they were sheltered, fed, and resting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, as they continued their journey toward Pine Hollow, a journey that had started in desperate circumstance, but was evolving into something neither could have predicted. As sleep claimed them both, the storm raged on, painting the wilderness white once more, covering their tracks and transforming the world anew. In the morning, they would face that changed landscape together, two unlikely companions bound by something stronger than mere survival. Morning brought an unexpected gift. Clear skies and sunshine that transformed the ice-coated world into a glittering spectacle. Every branch, every surface was encased in a thin layer of ice that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow prisms across the snow. "Beautiful," Eliza murmured as she stood in the doorway of the miner's cabin, "but treacherous." Benjamin nodded. As he checked the state of the trail, "The sun will help. By midday, the worst of the ice should melt. We'll leave then." The delay was frustrating but necessary. Attempting to navigate the ice-slicked terrain now would risk injuries they couldn't afford. They used the morning hours to prepare. Benjamin reinforced Eliza's makeshift boots with strips of leather from an old saddle he found in the cabin's lean-to, while Eliza packed food for their journey, selecting items that would travel well and provide sustenance. By noon, as Benjamin had predicted, the sun had softened the ice's grip on the landscape. Water dripped from tree branches, and patches of ground emerged where the sunshine had melted through the snow. They set out following Wolf Creek's meandering path, now moving more swiftly than before, driven by the knowledge that Pine Hollow and civilization lay just hours ahead. "Tell me about your cousin in Denver," Benjamin said as they navigated a particularly steep embankment. The conversation served dual purposes, distracting Eliza from the physical strain and learning more about her plans. "Sarah married a shopkeeper," Eliza explained, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "They have 2 children and a home with a spare room. She wrote after Thomas died, offering shelter until I could find my footing again. And after the baby comes." Eliza's hand instinctively moved to her growing belly. "I was a teacher before. I married. With Sarah's help watching the child, I hope to find a position again." Benjamin considered this quietly. "Teaching is honorable work." "What about you?" Eliza asked. "What is waiting for you at the reservation?" A complicated expression crossed his face. "Responsibilities. My mother is aging. As her only son, her care falls to me, and the younger hunters look to me for guidance." Eliza sensed there was more, something left unsaid about his place in the tribe, about expectations that weighed on him. But she didn't press. Their friendship, forged in survival, had boundaries she respected. The afternoon brought them to a spot where Wolf Creek widened significantly, joining with another stream to form a broader waterway. The terrain began to change, the wilderness, gradually giving way to signs of human presence. An old logging trail, stumps where trees had been harvested, even the distant mark of smoke against the sky. "Pine Hollow," Benjamin confirmed, pointing to the smoke. "Perhaps 2 more hours' walk." Their pace quickened with renewed determination. Eliza found herself both eager for and apprehensive about their arrival. The town meant safety, communication with her cousin, a continuation of her journey to Denver. But it also meant parting from Benjamin, whose steady presence had become an unexpected anchor in her chaotic life. The trail widened further, becoming something approaching a proper road as they neared the settlement. They encountered their first fellow human an hour from town, a bearded man with an axe slung over his shoulder, heading into the woods on some errand. He stopped short at the sight of them, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness as he took in the unusual pair. "Afternoon," he offered cautiously, his gaze moving between Eliza's pregnant form and Benjamin's unmistakably Cherokee features. "Good. Afternoon," Eliza replied with as much dignity as her travel-worn appearance allowed. "We're making for Pine Hollow. Is the telegraph office still open at this hour?" The simple, practical question seemed to ease the man's suspicion somewhat. "Till 5 o'clock, you've got time." His curiosity finally overcame his restraint. "You folks been caught in the blizzard?" "I was put off the train at Oak Ridge Station," Eliza said, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Mr. Wolf found me in the storm and saved my life." The woodcutter's eyes widened, his evaluation of the situation visibly shifting. "The railroad put you off in your condition during a storm?" "I lost my ticket," Eliza explained simply. The man shook his head in disgust. "Damn railroads. Not the first time they've done something like that either." He looked at Benjamin with newfound respect. "You brought her through 3 days of that weather? That's something." Benjamin acknowledged the comment with a nod, but said nothing. "Town's just down this road," the woodcutter continued, pointing. "Telegraph office is on Main Street. Can't miss it. Mrs. Rollins runs the boarding house if you need a place to stay. Tell her Joe Taylor sent you." With that, he continued on his way, leaving Eliza and Benjamin to process this first encounter with the outside world, the first hint of how their unusual partnership might be perceived. Pine Hollow revealed itself gradually. First, a few outlying cabins, then clusters of buildings, until they found themselves on a proper street lined with establishments typical of a frontier settlement: general store, blacksmith, saloon, church, and the all-important telegraph office. Their appearance drew curious glances from the few people braving the cold afternoon, but no outright hostility. Eliza was acutely aware of how they must look. She in her makeshift poncho over town clothes, Benjamin in his deerskin hunting attire, both bearing the unmistakable signs of days in the wilderness. The telegraph office was a small building, wedged between the general store and what appeared to be a lawyer's office. A bell jingled as they entered, announcing their presence to the thin, spectacled man behind the counter. "Help you folks?" he asked, looking up from his ledger. "I need to send a telegram to Denver," Eliza said, stepping forward. "To my cousin, Sarah Mitchell." While Eliza composed her message, a brief explanation of what had happened and when she hoped to arrive in Denver, Benjamin stood quietly by the door, observing the rhythms of the town through the window. He seemed neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply watchful, as if constantly assessing his surroundings. The telegram sent, they faced their next challenge: lodging for the night. Following the woodcutter's recommendation, they made their way to Mrs. Rollins' boarding house, a 2-story structure with a well-maintained exterior that spoke of its owner's pride. Mrs. Rollins herself answered the door, a broad-shouldered woman with grey-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She took in their appearance with a single sweep of her gaze. "Joe Taylor said you might have rooms available," Eliza began. "I do," Mrs. Rollins confirmed, "but I don't normally accept." Her eyes flicked to Benjamin. "Mr. Wolfe saved my life," Eliza stated firmly. "I was put off the train during the blizzard. Without him, my unborn child and I would have perished." Mrs. Rollins's expression softened slightly. "Is that so?" She looked at Benjamin more carefully. "That true, mister?" "She was near frozen when I found her," Benjamin replied simply. "We've traveled 3 days to reach town." Something in his dignity, his restraint, seemed to sway the woman. "Well, I suppose exceptional circumstances call for exceptional arrangements. I have 2 rooms at the back, not my best, but clean and warm." Relief washed over Eliza. One more night of shelter before continuing her journey. One more night before parting ways with the man who had become, in the span of just 3 days, the most significant person in her life, besides the child she carried. As they followed Mrs. Rollins into the boarding house, Eliza glanced at Benjamin, wondering if similar thoughts occupied his mind. His expression revealed nothing, but when he caught her looking, the slight nod he gave her held a world of unspoken understanding. They had survived the wilderness together. Now they faced a different kind of terrain, the complicated landscape of the civilized world, with its rigid boundaries and expectations. Whatever came next, those days in the storm had forged a connection between them that transcended the conventional order of things. And in that moment, watching Benjamin duck his head to enter the doorway of the boarding house, Eliza realized that reaching Denver might not be the end of her journey after all, but perhaps the beginning of something entirely unexpected. Mrs. Rollins' boarding house offered luxury compared to the wilderness shelters they'd recently occupied. Actual beds with clean linens, a washroom with hot water, and the promise of a proper supper served in the dining room at 6 o'clock sharp. Before retreating to their respective rooms, Eliza and Benjamin agreed to meet for the meal, both recognizing the need to discuss their next steps. Alone in her room, Eliza finally had a moment to truly process everything that had transpired since. Being forced from the train, she sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the simple comfort it represented after days of survival. A mirror hanging on the wall reflected a woman she barely recognized, thinner, weathered by wind and cold, eyes carrying wisdom earned through hardship. She washed thoroughly, grateful beyond words for the hot water and soap, and changed into her spare dress, the only other clothing she owned, carefully preserved in her small bundle throughout their journey. It was plain and practical, but clean and untorn, representing a return to civilization that felt both welcome and somehow constraining after the raw honesty of the wilderness. At precisely 6, she made her way to the dining room, where Benjamin already waited. He too had washed, his long black hair now neatly tied back, his face clean-shaven. Someone had provided him with a white cotton shirt to replace his buckskin hunting garment, Mrs. Rollins' doing, perhaps. The transformation emphasized both his handsome features and his otherness in this frontier town setting. Their fellow diners included a traveling salesman, a young couple passing through on their way west, and an elderly man whom Mrs. Rollins addressed as Judge. Curious glances were cast in their direction, but the boarding house proprietress had evidently shared something of their story, as the reactions held more respect than suspicion. The meal was simple but abundant. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh, bread and preserved vegetables. Eliza found herself ravenous, the days of trail rations having left her body craving substantive nourishment. Benjamin ate with equal appreciation, though with the measured restraint she'd come to recognize as characteristic of everything he did. "I've inquired about transportation to Denver," Benjamin said quietly as they neared the end of the meal. "The stagecoach comes through Pine Hollow every Wednesday," Eliza calculated quickly. "That's 4 days from now." He nodded. "I've also asked about work in town. The livery stable needs help clearing snow damage. It would provide enough for your stage ticket." "You'd stay to work?" Eliza was surprised. "What about your return to the reservation?" "It can wait," he replied simply. The matter-of-fact way he reorganized his own priorities to accommodate her needs touched Eliza deeply. No one since Thomas had shown such consideration for her welfare. And even Thomas had sometimes been too consumed by dreams of mining riches to see the practical challenges she faced. "I received a reply from my cousin," she said, changing the subject to process her emotions. "She was relieved to hear I'm safe and still welcomes me to Denver." Benjamin nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts about her eventual departure. "Good. You'll have a place to go." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Rollins, bearing apple pie and coffee. The older woman's initial wariness toward Benjamin had transformed into something approaching respect over the course of the evening, particularly after hearing more details of their journey. "Judge Foster here says the railroad company ought to face consequences for putting you off that train," she announced, setting pie before them. "Says it's criminal negligence, exposing a pregnant woman to deadly conditions over a lost ticket." The elderly man at the end of the table nodded gravely. "Indeed, the Sierra Pass Railroad has been taking liberties with passenger safety for years. I'd be willing to draft a formal complaint if you're interested, Mrs. Harmon." Eliza hadn't considered legal action. Her focus had been purely on survival, then on reaching Denver. "I wouldn't know how to pursue such a thing," she admitted. "That's what courts are for, my dear," Judge Foster replied. And I was presiding over cases in Colorado Territory before it was even a state. The railroad might offer a settlement rather than face public scrutiny. The possibility of financial compensation, money that could provide security for her and her child, was compelling. But it would mean remaining in Pine Hollow longer, delaying her journey to Denver. Could such a complaint be resolved quickly? She asked. I could have papers served to their regional office by tomorrow, Judge Foster said. Their response would determine the timeline. Could be days, could be weeks. Weeks. Eliza exchanged a glance with Benjamin, whose face remained impassive, but whose eyes communicated understanding of her dilemma. Think on it, the judge advised. No need to decide tonight. As the evening concluded and the diners dispersed, Eliza and Benjamin found themselves alone in the small sitting room adjacent to the dining area. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across their faces as they sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. What will you do? Benjamin finally asked, his deep voice barely audible above the fire's gentle popping. Eliza sighed. I don't know. The money would help tremendously with the baby coming, but waiting here, alone. She trailed off, realizing what she'd revealed. You wouldn't be alone, Benjamin said. I would stay. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, carrying implications neither was prepared to fully articulate. Eliza studied his face in the firelight, the strong profile, the quiet dignity, the eyes that had witnessed her at her most vulnerable and never once judged. Why? She asked softly. You've already done more than anyone could expect. Your family is waiting, your responsibilities— Some responsibilities find us, he interrupted gently. We don't choose them. The words resonated with Eliza's own experience of unexpected motherhood, of widow's grief, of survival against impossible odds. Choice had seemed a luxury beyond her reach for so long. Yet here, now, she faced a genuine decision about her path. Forward, I think, she said slowly, I should speak with Judge Foster tomorrow, learn more about what this legal action would entail. Benjamin nodded, accepting her decision without commentary. The livery stable owner expects me at dawn. I'll see you at breakfast? Yes, she replied. And Benjamin, thank you for everything. The words were woefully inadequate for what she truly meant, but his slight nod told her he understood what remained unspoken between them. Morning brought clarity and purpose. Over breakfast, hearty fare of flapjacks, bacon and strong coffee, Eliza informed Benjamin of her decision to pursue the complaint against the railroad. Judge Foster had arranged to meet her at 10 o'clock to begin the formal process. It's the right choice, Benjamin said. Not just for you, but for others who might face similar treatment. His approval strengthened her resolve. After breakfast, they parted ways. Benjamin to the livery stable, Eliza to prepare for her meeting with the judge. The separation, brief as it would be, felt strangely significant after days of constant proximity and shared survival. Judge Foster's temporary office was a small room above the town's only law practice. Despite its modest size, it exudes an air of authority. Leather-bound law books lining the shelves, certificates of legal qualification hanging on the walls, a substantial desk commanding the center of the space. The judge himself was efficiently personified, taking Eliza's detailed account of events, asking precise questions about times, locations, and the exact words exchanged with the conductor. His pen scratched across official-looking documents as she spoke. The crucial elements here, he explained, are that you had purchased a ticket, that the conductor seized valuable property, your mother's brooch, as partial payment, and that he then knowingly abandoned you in life-threatening conditions despite your visible pregnancy. Eliza nodded, the recounting stirring fresh anger at how carelessly her life had been endangered. What happens next? She asked. I'll have these papers delivered to the railroad's regional office in Mesa Junction, Judge Foster explained. By law, They must respond within 5 business days. Based on similar cases I've overseen, they'll likely send a representative to either dispute your claim or negotiate a settlement. 5 business days, nearly a week, plus however long negotiations might take. Eliza mentally adjusted her plans, calculating how long her meager funds would last at Mrs. Rollins' boarding house. As if reading her thoughts, Judge Foster added, "There's no fee for my services, Mrs. Harmon. I've been fighting railroad overreach for 20 years, and I've taken the liberty of speaking with Mrs. Rollins about your accommodations. She's agreed to extend credit until this matter is resolved." Touched by the unexpected support, Eliza thanked him. The people of Pine Hollow were proving kinder than she'd dared hope, perhaps influenced by the dramatic nature of her arrival, or perhaps simply demonstrating the frontier spirit of community that helped settlements survive the harsh mountain environment. When she related the developments to Benjamin that evening, he seemed unsurprised by the town's reaction. "People respect those who face hardship with courage," he said simply. "You've earned their regard." "As have you," she pointed out. "Mrs. Rollins asked specifically how you were faring at the livery." A hint of a smile touched Benjamin's lips. The closest thing to outright amusement she'd seen from him. "The stable owner's suspicious I'll steal his horses. Keep counting them when he thinks I'm not looking." The observation, delivered without bitterness, highlighted the prejudice Benjamin faced daily. Eliza had witnessed only the edges of it, the cautious glances, the deliberate distance some townspeople maintained when he walked beside her. Yet he navigated it with a grace that humbled her. As days passed, they established a routine that felt surprisingly domestic. Breakfast together. Before Benjamin left for work, separate daily activities, then reconnecting for dinner to share their experiences. Eliza spent her time either resting, as her pregnancy demanded, or making herself useful around the boarding house, helping Mrs. Rollins with cooking and mending to offset the generosity being shown to her. The arrangement gave her time to observe Pine Hollow more carefully, to recognize its potential as something more than a temporary stopping point. The town had a small schoolhouse, currently closed for winter break, its teacher having departed the previous month for family reasons back east. Several mothers lamented this fact to Eliza when they learned of her teaching background. "We've got 15 children with nothing to occupy them until spring term," one woman explained during a chance meeting at the general store. The school board's desperate to find even a temporary replacement. The information lingered in Eliza's mind, connecting with other observations. The town's lack of medical expertise beyond a self-trained healer who doubled as the barber. The growing population as mining operations expanded in the surrounding mountains. The strategic location along transportation routes that would only become more vital as the West developed. Pine Hollow was a town with a future. Whether it could be her future remained uncertain. On the 5th day after Judge Foster filed the complaint, word came that a railroad representative would arrive on the afternoon train. The news spread quickly through the small community, generating excitement disproportionate to the actual event. Though Eliza understood that in frontier towns, any break from routine became social entertainment. The railroad man who stepped onto Pine Hollow's small platform was exactly as she had imagined. Middle-aged, portly, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to having his way. He introduced himself to Judge Foster, who had come to meet the train, as Edmund Hargrove, legal counsel for Sierra Pass Railroad. Their initial meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock at the town hall, a grand name for what was essentially a large community room attached to the church. By 2:30, the room was filled with spectators, Pine Hollow's citizens, having abandoned their usual afternoon activities to witness what promised to be the most interesting event of the month. Benjamin sat quietly in the back row, his presence a grounding force for Eliza as she took her place beside Judge Foster at a table facing Mr. Hargrove. The railroad representative surveyed the crowded room with obvious displeasure, having clearly anticipated a private negotiation rather than a public spectacle. "This is highly irregular," he protested to Judge Foster. "Such matters are typically handled with discretion." "Nothing in the law requires privacy," the judge replied pleasantly, "and Mrs. Harmon's ordeal has naturally garnered community interest." Recognizing the tactical disadvantage, Hargrove shifted approach. "Mrs. Harmon," he addressed her directly, "the Sierra Pass Railroad extends sincere regret for any discomfort you experienced. Our conductor was following standard protocol for passengers unable to produce tickets, but perhaps showed insufficient judgment regarding the weather conditions." The careful wording, discomfort rather than life-threatening abandonment, insufficient judgment rather than criminal negligence, revealed the company's strategy to minimize the incident. "Mr. Hargrove," Eliza replied, her voice steady. "Despite her racing heart, I was 5 months pregnant and left at an unmanned station in a blizzard. Without Mr. Wolfe finding me by chance, I would have died, as would my unborn child." Discomfort seems an inadequate description. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Hargrove's expression soured slightly as he realized the public sentiment was firmly against him. Nevertheless, he continued, "The company is prepared to offer compensation in the amount of $50, along with a ticket to Denver, in exchange for releasing all claims against Sierra Pass Railroad." Judge Foster leaned forward. "That seems rather modest, given the circumstances, Mr. Hargrove. Mrs. Harmon's life was endangered, not to mention her unborn child. And there's the matter of her mother's brooch, confiscated by your conductor." A brooch was offered as payment," Hargrove countered. "Company policy allows conductors to accept valuables in lieu of cash." "At fair value," Judge Foster pointed out. "I'd be interested to know if the railroad recorded that brooch at anything approaching its true worth, or if it was recorded at all." The implication of potential theft by the conductor struck home. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Perhaps we could discuss a more appropriate figure." What followed was a negotiation that revealed Judge Foster's skill and experience. By the session's end, the settlement had increased to $300, return of the brooch, a public apology from the railroad, and a guarantee of safe passage to Denver whenever Eliza chose to make the journey. As the meeting concluded and the townspeople dispersed, discussing the excitement in animated groups, Eliza found herself surrounded by well-wishers, women who had been strangers days ago, now embracing her like a longtime friend, men tipping their hats respectfully, children staring in awe at the woman who had faced down the mighty railroad. Through it all, Benjamin remained slightly apart, observing, with quiet satisfaction, but never inserting himself into her moment of triumph. Only when the crowd thinned did he approach, his expression warm, despite his reserved demeanor. "You found your voice," he said simply. "I had good teachers," she replied. "Survival teaches courage." They walked back to the boarding house together, the setting sun painting Pine Hollow in golden light that seemed to transform the modest frontier settlement into something almost magical. Or perhaps, Eliza reflected, it was her perspective that had transformed, allowing her to see possibilities where before she had seen only temporary shelter. That evening, as they sat together on the boarding house porch despite the cold, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Eliza finally voiced the thoughts that had been taking shape since her arrival in Pine Hollow. "I'm considering staying," she said quietly. "At least for a while. The settlement money would allow me to rent a small house. The school needs a teacher, and when the baby comes—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express the rest. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Pine Hollow is a good town," he finally said. growing with good people. Would you... Eliza hesitated, gathering courage. Would you consider staying too? Not at the reservation, but here. The question hung between them, laden with implications. Neither had been ready to acknowledge during their desperate journey through the wilderness. Now, with survival no longer their primary concern, other considerations could finally surface, feelings that had taken root despite the unlikeliness of their connection. Benjamin turned to her, his face solemn in the starlight. "My place in the world has never been firmly set," he said carefully. "Not fully Cherokee, not accepted among whites. I've lived between worlds." "Perhaps that's why you could see me," Eliza said softly. "When I was caught between life and death in that storm, because you understand thresholds." He nodded, the observation striking some deep truth within him. "The reservation has others who can hunt, who can care for my mother, but you..." His words faltered, unused to expressing such thoughts. "I need you," Eliza finished simply, "not just for survival now, but for what comes next." As they sat together under the vast Colorado sky, the impossible distance they had traveled, not just through snow and wilderness, but across the social barriers that should have kept them apart, seemed both miraculous and somehow inevitable. Two people thrown together by circumstance, finding in each other something neither had dared hope to find again, a future worth fighting for. Pine Hollow slept around them, unaware that its newest residents had just made a decision that would bind them to the young town's destiny and to each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. Spring came early to Pine Hollow that year, as if nature itself approved of Eliza and Benjamin's decision to stay. March brought warm Chinook winds that melted the snowdrifts with surprising speed, revealing the first brave shoots of green beneath. By April, the town had transformed. Muddy streets drying, trees budding, residents emerging from winter confinement with renewed energy. Eliza's settlement money from the railroad had allowed her to rent a small two-room cabin on the eastern edge of town. It wasn't much, a main room serving as kitchen and living area, plus a bedroom hardly larger than the bed it contained. But it was the first place that had truly been hers alone since Thomas's death. With Benjamin's help and materials purchased from the general store, she had steadily improved the modest dwelling, adding shelves, patching leaks, and building a small porch where she could sit in the evening with her swollen feet elevated. The pregnancy had progressed well despite the earlier ordeal. Dr. Matthews, a proper physician who visited Pine Hollow monthly from larger Mesa Junction, had examined her and pronounced both mother and child healthy, though he cautioned her to rest more as her July due date approached. Rest, however, proved difficult. To prioritize with the demands of her new teaching position, the town council had hired her initially as a temporary replacement, but her obvious competence and the children's enthusiastic response quickly led to an offer of a permanent position, beginning with the fall term, after the baby's arrival. For now, she taught from 8 to 3 each weekday in the one-room schoolhouse, guiding 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old through a curriculum she'd had to largely develop herself. Benjamin's place in Pine Hollow had evolved. More gradually, his work at the livery stable had expanded to include carpentry for various town projects, hunting to supply the general store with game, and occasional guiding for mining surveyors exploring the surrounding mountains. He'd rented a small room above the blacksmith's shop rather than imposing on Eliza's limited space, though he spent most of his waking hours either working around her cabin or sitting with her on the porch, planning for the coming child. Their relationship remained a subject of muted controversy in Pine Hollow. No declarations of romantic intention had been made publicly, yet their evident closeness, a Cherokee man and a white widow, generated whispers. Some residents, like Mrs. Rollins and Judge Foster had become staunch allies, treating the unusual friendship as natural and worthy of respect. Others maintained a polite distance, civil but wary. A few, particularly newer residents without knowledge of their dramatic history, expressed open disapproval. Eliza and Benjamin weathered it all with the same quiet dignity that had carried them through the wilderness, neither hiding their bond nor flaunting it. What existed between them had been forged in circumstances few could comprehend, a connection transcending conventional societal boundaries. On a warm May evening, Eliza sat correcting student essays on her porch while Benjamin worked nearby, constructing a cradle from pine wood harvested and cured himself. The rhythmic sound of his sanding provided a soothing backdrop to her work until the approach of footsteps drew both their attention. Sheriff Taylor, Joe Taylor's older brother and Pine Hollow's only law enforcement, came into view, his expression serious but not alarming. He nodded to them both, removing his hat as he addressed Eliza. "Evening, Mrs. Harmon." "Wolf." His gaze shifted between them. "Got some news I thought you should hear directly from me, rather than through town." "Gossip?" Eliza set aside her papers, instantly alert. "What is it, Sheriff?" "Railroad conductor named Maxwell was arrested in Denver yesterday." He glanced at Benjamin, who had paused in his work. "Denver authorities connected him to several cases of theft and abandonment of passengers. Your case was mentioned specifically in the warrant." The name stirred painful memories. The cold-eyed man who had put her off the train, who had taken her mother's brooch, who had nearly caused her death with his callous indifference. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "He'll stand trial," Sheriff Taylor explained. "Judge Foster received a letter requesting your testimony if you're willing. Would mean a trip to Denver next month." Eliza's hand moved automatically to her belly, now prominent enough to make travel uncomfortable at best, potentially dangerous at worst. "The baby is due in July. I don't think traveling in June would be wise." "Thought you might say that." Sheriff Taylor nodded. "Judge says they can take a sworn statement here instead, though it won't carry the same weight in court." Benjamin spoke for the first time. "The conductor would face prison. If convicted, yes. Several years at least. There was a death connected to one of the cases. Elderly man abandoned at a similar remote stop last winter. Body wasn't found until spring thaw. The information settled heavily between them. Justice seemed possible, yet somehow hollow in the face of such needless tragedy. "I'll provide whatever statement is needed," Eliza decided, "but I won't risk this child's well-being to travel." After the sheriff departed, they sat in contemplative silence as twilight deepened around them. Benjamin resumed his sanding, each stroke deliberate and precise, while Eliza watched, her mind far from the ungraded essays in her lap. "Does it bring peace?" Benjamin finally asked. "Knowing he faces punishment?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "Not peace exactly, but completion, perhaps, as if a story that began with cruelty might end with justice." Benjamin nodded, understanding her need for narrative closure. Some circles must complete themselves before new ones can begin. The wisdom in his words touched something deep within her. The recognition that her life had moved through distinct chapters, each with its necessary conclusion before the next could commence. Thomas and the mining town belonged to a chapter now closed. The desperate journey through the blizzard had ended with their arrival in Pine Hollow. Now she stood at the beginning of a new circular path, one containing this town, her students, the coming child, and Benjamin, whose place in her life remained undefined yet essential. "I've been thinking," she said, watching his hands work the smooth wood of what would soon cradle her child. "This cabin is small for 2 people, Let. Alone 3. Benjamin's hands stilled, though his eyes remained on his work. "Yes," The school board has offered to help me find a larger place after the baby comes, something with a proper second bedroom. She hesitated, then pressed on. I'd like you to consider living there as well, not as a boarder or a friend, but as words. Failed her. What terms existed for what they were to each other? Not husband and wife, no ceremony had blessed their union, not merely friends. The bond between them had grown far deeper than friendship. Not savior and saved. Though that might be how their story began, they had long since moved to equal partnership. Benjamin finally looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. Are you certain? There would be talk. There's already talk, she pointed out with a small smile. At least this way the child would have both of us under one roof. Your reputation as a teacher is secure, she interrupted gently. The school board cares more about the children's progress than about who shares my home. Judge Foster has already hinted he'd be willing to speak on our behalf if anyone raises official objections. Benjamin set aside his tools and moved to sit beside her on the porch step. Proximity had become comfortable between them over the months, though they maintained a public restraint born of respect for conventional boundaries. There's another option, he said quietly. We could marry. The suggestion hung in the evening air, surprising in its directness from a man typically so careful with words. Could we? Eliza asked, equally direct. Legally? Benjamin's expression tightened slightly. Not in all states, but Colorado has no specific law against it. Judge Foster would perform the ceremony if asked. The possibility spread before Eliza like an unopened map. A legitimate family, her child with a legal father, their unusual bond sanctioned by society's most recognized institution. Yet she hesitated, sensing Benjamin's own ambivalence beneath. The practical suggestion, is that what you want, she asked, marriage for legitimacy's sake? Benjamin's gaze shifted to the distant mountains, now purple shadows against the darkening sky. What I want, he said carefully, is to remain by your side and the children's, to provide, to protect, to watch you both thrive. The name given to that arrangement matters less to me than its substance. His honesty settled something within her. Then let's wait, she decided. After the baby comes, after we've lived together and truly understood what we're building, then we can decide if marriage would strengthen it or simply constrain it. In the deepening twilight, Benjamin's hand found hers, a rare gesture of physical affection that spoke volumes about his acceptance of her proposal. They sat together as the first stars appeared, two people who had survived nature's harshest trial, now facing a different kind of challenge, creating a family that defied convention in a world not yet ready to embrace such defiance. June brought increasingly uncomfortable heat and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Eliza's classroom duties had ended for the summer, allowing her needed rest as her body grew unwieldy. The women of Pine Hollow, those who had embraced her presence among them, organized a baby gathering, presenting her with handmade blankets, gowns, diapers, and practical advice delivered with varying degrees of tact. Mrs. Rollins proved particularly supportive, visiting often to check on Eliza's condition and bringing nourishing meals when the heat made cooking unbearable. During one such visit, while Benjamin was away guiding a survey party in the mountains, the older woman finally addressed the arrangement that everyone discussed, but few mentioned directly. You know, I think the world of you both, she began, her hands busy folding tiny garments while Eliza rested in the cabin's single comfortable chair. And I understand better than most what you've been through together. Eliza braced herself for judgment or unwelcome advice. What I don't understand, Mrs. Rollins continued, is why you'd hesitate to marry. Is it because you don't love him? The bluntness of the question caught Eliza off guard. No, she admitted, it's not that. Is it because of Thomas? Feeling disloyal to his memory, Eliza considered this possibility, which had indeed crossed her mind during sleepless nights. Partly, perhaps. Though I think Thomas would want me to find happiness again. Mrs. Rollins nodded, satisfied with the honesty of the response. Then it's the differences between you, his background, his heritage. Not as obstacles, Eliza clarified, quickly, but as realities that a formal union would force others to acknowledge and judge. Benjamin already faces enough prejudice without adding that burden. The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. You're protecting him, and he's protecting me, Eliza said with a sad smile. Each of us thinks of the other's reputation rather than our own desires. It's a strange sort of stalemate. Mrs. Rollins set aside the folded baby clothes and leaned forward earnestly. Let me tell you something about frontier towns, Eliza. They survive because practicality eventually overcomes prejudice. A useful man, a competent woman, these become more valuable than adherence to rules made in distant cities. She gestured around the small cabin. Pine Hollow needs you both. The children need their teacher. The miners need game meat through. Winter, the buildings need skilled hands for repairs. Her voice was gentle, and that baby will need a father who's present not just in spirit, but in name. The wisdom landed with surprising weight. Eliza had framed their hesitation as progressive thinking, a refusal to bow to conventions that served no purpose beyond social control. But perhaps, she now realized, they were actually allowing fear of judgment to override their own needs. And the child's, think on it, Mrs. Rollins advised, rising to leave. That's all I ask. The conversation replayed in Eliza's mind over the following days as she waited for Benjamin's return. When he finally appeared, trail-worn but successful in his guiding mission, she found herself studying him with new eyes, this man who had repositioned his entire life around hers without complaint or expectation. They settled easily back into their routine, Benjamin staying late into the evening to complete work on the cabin before returning to his rented room above the blacksmith's. Neither mentioned the imminent change to their living arrangements, though the cradle now stood finished beside Eliza's bed, a constant reminder of what approached. On the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, Eliza awoke before dawn with a distinct feeling that something had changed. The baby, previously active primarily in the evenings, moved with unusual vigor as the first light appeared on the horizon. By mid-morning, when Benjamin arrived to repair her leaking water pump, the intermittent cramping she'd dismissed as normal discomfort had organized itself into a pattern she could no longer ignore. "It's starting," she told him calmly when he entered the cabin. "Mrs. Rollins should be notified, and Hannah Mills, she's agreed to assist with the birth." Benjamin's composure slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of alarm before his features settled back into determined focus. "Ah, you certain? It's early, not yet July." "Babies follow their own calendars," Eliza replied, with a strained smile as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. "This one seems impatient to meet us." What followed was a day of steadily intensifying labor, the women of Pine Hollow rallying around Eliza while Benjamin was firmly excluded from the birthing room, a universal tradition even here on the frontier. He spent the hours pacing the small porch, carving intricate patterns into a piece of pine to keep his hands occupied, while his mind remained fixed on the muted sounds from within the cabin. The sun had set and risen again before the distinctive cry of a newborn pierced the early morning stillness. Benjamin froze mid-stride, the carved wood forgotten in his hand as he stared at the cabin door, waiting for news with barely contained emotion. Mrs. Rollins emerged first, her face tired but beaming. "A girl," she announced. "Healthy and strong, with a fine set of lungs." Benjamin sagged slightly with relief. "And Eliza?" "Exhausted but well. She's asking for you." The bedroom was dim and warm, scented with the metallic tang of birth and the sharp cleanliness of boiled linens. Eliza reclined against pillows, her face pale but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in one of the gifts from the baby gathering. She looked up as Benjamin entered, her eyes shining with a joy he'd never before witnessed in her. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. The child was indeed small, born early but not dangerously so, with a cap of dark hair and skin, a shade between her mother's paleness and Benjamin's copper tone. As he approached cautiously, the infant's eyes opened, revealing irises of deepest brown that seemed impossibly aware for one so newly arrived in the world. "She has your eyes," Eliza whispered. The simple observation acknowledged what had remained unspoken between them, that this child, conceived with Thomas months before Benjamin entered their lives, had somehow become theirs together in a way that transcended biology. The miracle was not the birth itself, but the family created in the aftermath of near tragedy. "Grace," Benjamin said, recalling their conversation from the trapper's cabin months earlier. "Her name is Grace." Eliza nodded, tears welling. Grace Sarah Wolf-Harmon. The hyphenated surname, so uncommon as to be revolutionary, represented everything they were attempting to build. A bridge between separate worlds, an acknowledgement of dual heritage, a family defined not by convention, but by choice and commitment. Benjamin reached out tentatively, allowing the newborn to grasp his finger with surprising strength. "Wolf-Harmon," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "A new beginning." As dawn brightened the small bedroom window, bathing the three of them in golden light, Eliza made her decision. "When I'm recovered, we should speak to Judge Foster about making official what already exists between us." Benjamin's eyes met hers over their daughter's head. "You're certain?" "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "Some circles complete themselves so new ones can begin. Our circle started in a blizzard with survival as its only purpose. Now it expands to include grace, to include a future. We choose deliberately." Outside, Pine Hollow awakened to another day. Miners heading to the hills, shopkeepers opening their doors, children released from school for summer playing in dusty streets. None could know that in a small cabin on the town's edge, a family had been born that would eventually challenge their preconceptions, expand their definitions of community, and help transform their frontier outpost into a true home. For now, the three remained in their private sanctuary, a man who had once walked between worlds, finding solid ground at last, a woman who had faced death emerging stronger than before, and between them, a tiny life representing hope that transcended the circumstances of her creation. Together, they formed a new constellation in the firmament of the American West, unexpected, unprecedented, and unbreakable. 5 years passed in Pine Hollow, each season marking changes both subtle and profound in the town and its inhabitants. What had begun as a small mining settlement had gradually evolved into a proper community with aspirations beyond mere survival. A new church had been built, larger than the first. The general store had expanded to include a second floor of dry goods. Most significantly, the railroad, the very entity that had once abandoned Eliza to die, had established a proper station at the edge of town, connecting Pine Hollow more firmly to the wider world. Grace Wolf-Harmon had grown from the tiny newborn of that summer solstice morning into a spirited 5-year-old, with her mother's quick mind and her father's quiet, observational skills. Her dark eyes missed nothing, and her questions about the world around her often left adults scrambling for adequate answers. She moved between the white and native communities with an ease that neither of her parents could claim, accepted by, both in a way that spoke to the integration she represented. The Wolf-Harmon home had expanded as well. With Benjamin's carpentry skills and Eliza's steady teaching income, they had gradually added rooms to the original cabin. A proper bedroom for Grace, a covered back porch that served as Benjamin's workshop during inclement weather, and most recently, a small library where Eliza prepared lessons and stored the growing collection of books ordered from Denver and even as far as Chicago. Their marriage, performed by Judge Foster 3 months after Grace's birth, had initially created the expected ripples of controversy. Several families had temporarily withdrawn their children from Eliza's classroom in protest. The town council had held a special meeting to discuss the propriety of a mixed-race couple teaching impressionable youth. But, as Mrs. Rollins had predicted, practicality ultimately prevailed over prejudice. Eliza's skill as an educator proved too valuable to sacrifice to outdated sensibilities, and Benjamin's contributions to the town's growth, from hunting to construction, to his developing role as an intermediary with the native communities in the region, made the family increasingly central to Pine Hollow's prosperity. On a crispy autumn morning in 1892, Eliza stood at the schoolhouse window, watching the maple trees in the yard surrender their leaves to the wind. Behind her, 24 students worked diligently on their arithmetic exercises, 9 more than when she'd first taken the position. The sound of pencils scratching paper created a soothing backdrop to her thoughts as she contemplated the letter that had arrived on yesterday's train. The Denver courthouse had finally reached a verdict in the case against Maxwell, the Sierra Pass Railroad conductor. After numerous delays and legal maneuverings, he had been sentenced to 12 years for theft, negligence resulting in death and endangerment of passengers. Justice, so long delayed it had almost lost its significance, had finally arrived. Eliza wasn't sure how to feel about the news. The man's actions had nearly killed her and her unborn child, and had caused actual death to at least one other abandoned passenger. Yet his cruelty had also, through a chain of impossible circumstances, led her to Benjamin and to Pine Hollow. Without that terrible night on the platform at Oak Ridge Station, she would have reached Denver as planned, would have lived with her cousin, and would likely have found some respectable widowed shopkeeper to marry eventually. A safe life, perhaps, but not the extraordinary one she now led. Mrs. Wolfharmon, a small voice, interrupted her reverie. Young Emma Wilson stood beside her desk, arithmetic slate in hand. "I finished the problems. May I help the younger children now?" Eliza smiled at her most promising student. "Of course, Emma. Check with Billy first. He was struggling with the carrying concept." As Emma moved purposefully toward the younger students section, Eliza returned to her desk, setting aside the courthouse letter to focus on the afternoon's history lesson. The past, while important to acknowledge, held less urgency than the present moment and the futures she helped shape daily in this classroom. The school day ended at 3 o'clock as always, with the children gathering their belongings and filing out into the autumn sunshine. Eliza remained behind to prepare the next day's lessons, a task that typically kept her at the schoolhouse until 4:30. Today, however, she had just settled at her desk when the door opened to reveal Benjamin, an unexpected midday visitor. "Is everything all right?" she asked immediately, concern rising at his unscheduled appearance. "Everything's fine," he assured her, removing his hat as he entered the schoolroom. "I finished the Wilsons' barn roof early and thought I'd walk you home. There's something I want to discuss." Intrigued, Eliza gathered her materials. "Let me collect Grace from Mrs. Patterson's first. She watches her after school on Tuesdays when I prepare lessons." They walked together through Pine Hollows, Main Street, drawing the usual mix of greetings and stares. 5 years of marriage had not completely normalized their union in everyone's eyes, but the overt hostility had largely faded to background curiosity. Benjamin's hand rested lightly at the small of Eliza's back as they navigated the busier section. Near the general store, a subtle public affirmation of their connection that never failed to warm her. "I received a letter from Denver yesterday," she mentioned, as they turned onto the quieter side street where the Patterson family lived. The conductor was sentenced to 12 years. Benjamin absorbed this information with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Does it bring you peace?" The echo of the question he'd asked years earlier brought a smile to Eliza's lips. Not peace, exactly, but perhaps a sense that a chapter has properly closed. He nodded, understanding as always the nuances of her feelings. Appropriate timing. Then, for what? Before he could answer, their conversation was interrupted by the joyful shout of "Papa!" as Grace burst from the Pattersons' front gate, launching herself toward Benjamin with complete confidence he would catch her mid-flight. He did, swinging her up into his arms with practiced ease despite her growing size. "I made a drawing of our house," Grace announced, proudly displaying a paper covered with colorful renderings of what was recognizably their cabin, complete with the new library addition and Benjamin's workshop. "It's beautiful," he praised, examining the artwork seriously. "You captured the pine tree by the porch perfectly." Mrs. Patterson appeared at her gate, smiling at the family tableau. "She's quite the artist," the older woman observed, "and a wonderful helper with my younger ones. Thank you for letting her visit." With Grace settled on Benjamin's shoulders, her preferred method of transportation despite Eliza's concerns about her getting too old for such treatment, they continued homeward. Their cabin sat on what was now the eastern edge of Pine Hollow's expanding borders, far enough from the bustle of town to feel private but close enough for convenience. As they approached, Eliza noticed fresh split logs stacked neatly beside the porch, Benjamin's preparation for the coming winter. "Now," Eliza said, once they were settled inside and Grace had been set up at her small table with paper and crayons, "what did you want to discuss that couldn't wait until dinner?" Benjamin's expression grew serious as he removed an envelope from his pocket. "I received this yesterday from the Cherokee Eastern Band Council." Eliza accepted the letter with curiosity. Benjamin maintained connections with his tribe, traveling to the reservation several times yearly to visit his aging mother and participate in important ceremonies. But official correspondence was unusual. The letter, written in formal language that belied its significant content, extended an invitation, or perhaps more accurately a request, for Benjamin to return to the reservation in a permanent capacity. His knowledge of both Cherokee and white worlds, his success in navigating between the cultures, and his practical skills made him uniquely qualified to serve as a tribal representative in negotiations with the federal government regarding land rights and resource access. "They need someone who understands both sides," Benjamin explained as Eliza finished reading. "Someone who can translate not just words, but intentions." The implications settled heavily between them. A return to the reservation would mean uprooting. Their life in Pine Hollow, Eliza's teaching position, their carefully expanded home, Grace's familiar surroundings. Yet Eliza recognized immediately the significance of the request. For Benjamin, who had often felt caught between worlds, this represented a profound acknowledgement of his value to his people. "When would they need your answer?" she asked, carefully keeping her tone neutral. "By spring," he replied. "If we agreed, we would move after the school term ends." "We." The word carried weight, the assumption that they would face this decision as a family, that separation was not an option being considered. 5 years of marriage had cemented their partnership into something neither would willingly fracture. "And if we went," Eliza ventured, glancing toward Grace, who remained absorbed in her drawing, "what would that mean for me?" For Grace, Benjamin had clearly anticipated the question. "You would be welcomed as my wife. The Eastern Band has several mixed marriages, though not many. There's a school on the reservation that needs teachers, not well funded like here, but important work. Eliza nodded slowly, processing the possibilities. And Grace would be raised in Cherokee traditions, alongside the education you would provide, Benjamin confirmed. She would have both worlds, not caught between them as I was. The conversation paused as Grace approached, proudly displaying her latest artistic creation, a family portrait, with exaggerated features but recognizable likenesses. Eliza and Benjamin praised it appropriately before suggesting she begin setting the table for dinner, a responsibility the 5-year-old took very seriously. As Grace arranged plates and utensils, with methodical care, Eliza met Benjamin's eyes across the room. "We don't need to decide tonight," she said quietly. "This deserves careful thought." He nodded, relieved by her measured response. "We have months to consider." The evening proceeded with their usual routine, a simple but nourishing dinner. Stories by the fire as Grace prepared for bed, quiet conversation between husband and wife once their daughter slept. Yet beneath the familiar patterns ran an undercurrent of anticipation, of possible futures branching from this unexpected fork in their path. The following weeks brought autumn's full glory to the Colorado mountains. Eliza continued her teaching duties while contemplating what it would mean to instruct children of a different culture, with different needs and expectations. Benjamin completed his building projects in town with a new attentiveness, as if seeing Pine Hollow through the lens of potential departure. Grace, perceptive beyond her years, sensed the subtle shift in her parents' demeanor and responded with occasional bouts of clinginess, alternating with fierce independence. On a Sunday afternoon in late October, with the aspen trees flaming gold, against the evergreen backdrop, the family took their usual weekend walk along Wolf Creek, named long before Benjamin's arrival in the region, but now carrying a personal significance. Grace ran ahead, collecting particularly vibrant leaves for a project she'd conceived, while Eliza and Benjamin followed at a more measured pace. "I visited Judge Foster yesterday," Eliza said, as they rounded a bend in the creek. "Asked him about legal considerations if we moved to the reservation." Benjamin glanced at her with interest. "What did he say?" "That our marriage remains legally recognized regardless of location," she replied. "But that property ownership becomes complicated. On reservation land, our cabin here would need to be sold rather than held in absence." The practical approach to the possibility revealed more than direct questioning could have. Eliza was genuinely considering the move, weighing tangible factors rather than merely entertaining the idea to respect his heritage. "There would be challenges," Benjamin acknowledged. "The reservation has fewer comforts than Pine Hollow. The government agent who oversees tribal affairs can be difficult, and some traditionalists might view you with suspicion initially." Eliza smiled slightly. "I faced suspicion before, when I first came to Pine Hollow, when we married, when I continued teaching afterward." "This would be different," he cautioned. "You would be the minority there, not me." She nodded, understanding the subtle but significant distinction, a reversal of experiences. They walked in silence for a moment, watching Grace balance on a fallen log, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker. The child represented what was possible when different worlds combined, not a dilution of either heritage, but a unique strengthening, like the iron-carbon alloys Benjamin had learned to work with at the blacksmith's forge. "There's something else to consider," Eliza said carefully. "Something I've only recently confirmed." Benjamin turned to her, suddenly alert to the change in her tone. "Grace will have a sibling by summer," she said simply. "I visited Dr. Matthews yesterday." Joy transformed Benjamin's typically reserved expression. 5 years earlier, he had entered Grace's life after her birth, embracing the role of father. Without the biological connection, this child would be different. Theirs, together from conception, a physical manifestation of their union. "How do you feel?" he asked, his hand reaching for hers. Well, she assured him, stronger than with Grace, and more certain of my path. They stood together beside the creek, hands linked as they watched their daughter, now joined in spirit by the promise of another child, another extension of their unlikely family. The decision before them had gained additional complexity, additional weight. A Cherokee birth, Benjamin mused thoughtfully. There are ceremonies, traditions. My mother would know them all. Eliza squeezed his hand. Tell me, as they continued. Their walk, Benjamin shared the Cherokee beliefs surrounding birth, the sacred connections between mother and child, the community responsibilities toward new life, the naming ceremonies that acknowledged a soul's arrival into the physical world. Eliza listened intently, recognizing the beauty in these traditions so different from her own cultural background. By the time they called Grace to join them for the return home, something had shifted in Eliza's consideration of their possible future. What had initially seemed a sacrifice of her established life in Pine Hollow now revealed itself as an opportunity, a chance for their children to experience a heritage that would otherwise remain distant and abstract, known only through Benjamin's stories rather than lived experience. That evening, after Grace had been tucked into bed with her collected leaves carefully pressed between the pages of a heavy book, Eliza and Benjamin sat before the fire in the comfortable silence of long partnership. "I think we should go," she said finally, her voice steady with conviction. "Not because you need it or because I'm willing to sacrifice, but because it's right for our family, for Grace, for the new baby." Benjamin studied her face in the firelight, searching for any hesitation behind. Her words, "You're certain?" "I've built my life around teaching children to understand the world," she replied. "What better way to expand my own understanding than to immerse our family in a different way of seeing, of knowing? We can always return to Pine Hollow someday if the reservation proves too difficult." The decision, once articulated, seemed to settle around them like a mantle, not constraining but clarifying, defining the next chapter of their extraordinary journey together. From a chance encounter in a deadly blizzard to a cross-cultural family preparing to bridge worlds once more, their path had never followed expected routes, but had instead carved new possibilities through seemingly impassable terrain. Winter arrived, early that year, as if eager to remind them of where their story had begun. The first heavy snow fell in November, transforming Pine Hollow into a white-blanketed version of itself. As Benjamin added logs to the fire and Eliza prepared a letter formally accepting the Cherokee Council's invitation, Grace pressed her face to the window, watching snowflakes swirl in patterns only she could discern. "Mama," she called suddenly, "is this like the snow you were lost in when Papa found you?" The question, innocent yet profound, drew both parents' attention. They exchanged a glance, recognizing the perfect circle their journey had created, from a desperate struggle against winter's fury to a warm home contemplating a snowy evening with their daughter. "No, sweetheart," Eliza answered, moving to join Grace at the window. "That snow was dangerous because I was alone. This snow is beautiful because we're together." Benjamin joined them, his hand resting lightly on Eliza's shoulder where the new life grew beneath her heart. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Pine Hollow's familiar landscapes with transformative white, not erasing what lay beneath, but revealing new contours, new possibilities in what had seemed fully known. Like the snow, their future on the Cherokee reservation would reshape their understanding of family, of community, of belonging. It would challenge them in ways Pine Hollow never could, would demand growth and adaptation and courage. But as they stood together, watching winter's beautiful transformation, Eliza felt only anticipation for the journey ahead. A journey that had begun with abandonment on a snowy platform years ago, but had led, through hardship and love and unexpected turns, to this moment of perfect certainty, They were a family forged in blizzard and survival, strengthened through prejudice and acceptance, and now poised to carry their unique bridge between worlds to a place where such bridges were desperately needed. Whatever challenges awaited on the reservation, they would face them as they had faced all previous obstacles, together drawing strength from the unlikely bond that had first formed in the howling wilderness of a Colorado winter. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the fire crackled. And between these elemental forces, the Wolf-Harmon family stood united, past honored, present cherished, future embraced with open hearts and the quiet courage that had carried them from strangers to soulmates against all odds. The journey to the Cherokee Reservation in the spring of 1893 marked yet another transformation in the saga of the Wolf-Harmon family. They departed Pine Hollow amid a mixture of well-wishes and concerned murmurs, traveling first by the very railroad that had once abandoned Eliza, then by wagon through increasingly remote territory until they reached the boundaries of the Eastern Band's lands nestled in the mountains of North Carolina. Their arrival caused a stir among the reservation community. Though Benjamin had visited regularly, returning with a white wife, a mixed-race daughter, and another child on the way, represented something entirely new. Marion Wolfe, Benjamin's mother, greeted them at the door of her small cabin with cautious joy. At 73, her face mapped with the deep lines of a difficult life, she embodied the resilience that had allowed the Eastern Band to survive when many of their people had been forced westward decades earlier. "So you have come home," she said to Benjamin in Cherokee before switching to careful English for Eliza's benefit, "and brought your family good." The simple acceptance from this family matriarch eased their transition. Marion, standing in the tribe as the widow of a respected elder and mother of a successful son, provided a buffer against the initial wariness some community members displayed toward Eliza. Within days, arrangements had been made to construct a cabin for the growing family on land adjacent to Marion's, allowing privacy while maintaining the close family connections valued in Cherokee culture. Eliza's pregnancy progressed well, despite the challenges of adapting to reservation life. The absence of conveniences she had taken for granted in Pine Hollow, readily available medicines, variety in foodstuffs, the social network of supportive women she had cultivated, was offset by the remarkable knowledge of her mother-in-law, whose understanding of herbal remedies and traditional birthing practices had been preserved through generations of Cherokee women. "The baby moves differently than Grace did," Eliza observed one evening, as she and Marion sat shelling beans on the porch of the older woman's cabin. "More forceful, somehow." Marion nodded knowingly. "A son. He announces himself strongly." Whether intuition or experience guided this pronouncement, Eliza couldn't say, but she found herself accepting the older woman's certainty. A son would bring balance to their family. A brother for Grace, a male heir for Benjamin's lineage, in a culture where such connections held particular significance. Grace, with the adaptability of childhood, had integrated into reservation life with remarkable ease. Within weeks, she was playing with the Cherokee children, absorbing their language with the effortless facility only the very young possess. Her mixed heritage, which had occasionally marked her as different in Pine Hollow, became an asset here, a living bridge between cultures that children accepted without the complications adults imposed. Benjamin's role as tribal representative quickly proved more demanding than anticipated. The federal government, increasingly interested in the resources found on tribal lands, sent a succession of agents with proposals that required careful scrutiny. Benjamin's ability to read between the lines of legal documents, to understand the white negotiators' unstated intentions, and to translate cultural concepts in both directions, made him invaluable to the tribal council. "They offer money for timber rights," he explained to Eliza after a particularly grueling session. But the contract would give them access to sacred grounds they claim not to know exist. And if the tribe refuses? Eliza asked, recognizing the familiar pattern from stories of other reservations. They hint at forced relocation again, Benjamin replied, the strain evident in his voice. Empty threats, most likely. But the elders remember the trail of tears. Fear is a powerful negotiating tool. These pressures made Benjamin's presence at the reservation all the more meaningful, but also heightened Eliza's awareness of the precarious position indigenous communities occupied in a nation expanding with little regard for prior claims or ancient connections to the land. By late summer, with Eliza's pregnancy in its final weeks, she had established herself as a teacher in the reservation's small school. The federal government provided minimal funding for basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic taught in English, with the explicit goal of assimilation. But Eliza quietly expanded the curriculum to include Cherokee history and cultural knowledge, collaborating with tribal elders to preserve traditions the official curriculum sought to erase. "You walk a dangerous line," Benjamin cautioned when he learned of these additions. "The Indian agent visits the school regularly." "Then we'll be especially careful during his visits," Eliza replied, with the quiet determination that had carried her through wilderness, prejudice, and now this new challenge. These children deserve to know their own history, not just the version approved by Washington. Her stance, potentially controversial for a white teacher, earned her growing respect among the tribal members who had initially viewed her with suspicion. By subtly resisting the assimilationist policies embedded in her official position, Eliza demonstrated an understanding of the cultural erosion threatening the Cherokee way of life, and a willingness to stand against it despite her own background. When labor began on an August night filled with the songs of katydids and whippoorwills, Eliza found herself surrounded by a circle of support unlike anything she had experienced with Grace's birth. Marion took charge, assisted by two other older women whose knowledge of childbirth practices had been passed down through countless generations. Benjamin, initially relegated to pacing outside as was custom in Pine Hollow, was instead invited to participate in specific ways, providing support behind Eliza as she knelt in the traditional birthing position, speaking encouragement in a mixture of Cherokee and English, offering the ceremonial water at precise moments in the labor. James Thomas Wolfe Harmon entered the world as dawn broke over the mountain ridges, announcing his arrival with a powerful cry that seemed to validate Marion's earlier prediction. Unlike the clinical efficiency of Grace's birth under the supervision of Pine Hollow's midwife, this delivery incorporated spiritual elements that connected the newborn to both his ancestral heritage and the natural world surrounding them. "He comes between worlds," Marion pronounced as she washed the infant in water infused with sacred herbs. "Like his father before him, but he will never doubt where he belongs." The birth of a healthy son cemented Eliza's position within the community. What had been cautious acceptance transformed into genuine inclusion as she recovered under the care of the women who had attended the birth. Grace, fascinated by her new brother, appointed herself his primary guardian, solemnly explaining to anyone who would listen that she would teach him everything important, a declaration that spanned from how to identify edible berries to the proper way to hold a pencil. As James grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the rhythms of reservation life became second nature to the Wolfe Harmon family. The challenges remained significant. Winters were harsh with limited resources. Government policies increasingly restricted tribal autonomy, and occasional visitors from surrounding towns brought prejudice that required careful navigation. Yet within these constraints, they found a richness of community and purpose that transcended material comfort. In the spring of 1897, nearly 4 years after their arrival, an unexpected letter arrived from Pine Hollow. Judge Foster, now in declining health, had been organizing his affairs and had discovered a legal matter requiring Eliza's attention. The railroad company, in addition to the settlement paid years earlier, had been ordered to establish a trust for Grace's education as part of a broader judgment against their negligent practices. The funds, now substantial with accumulated interest, would become available when she turned 18. "We should return to finalize the paperwork," Eliza suggested as she and Benjamin discussed the letter. It would be good for Grace to see Pine Hollow again, to understand the place where she was born. Benjamin agreed, recognizing the importance of maintaining connections to all parts of their family story. Arrangements were made for a month-long journey, time enough to resolve the legal matters and reconnect with friends who had formed such an important chapter in their lives. Pine Hollow had changed dramatically in their absence. The railroad station had expanded into a proper depot with regular passenger service. The main street boasted a bank, a photography studio, even a small hotel with aspirations beyond frontier functionality. Yet beneath the physical transformation, the essential character of the community remained, the practical frontier spirit that valued competence and contribution over rigid social boundaries. Mrs. Rollins, now significantly greyer, but no less formidable, welcomed them to her boarding house with open arms. "I knew you'd return someday," she declared, fussing over 9-year-old Grace and 4-year-old James as if they were her own grandchildren. "Though I expected it might be permanent. Just visiting this time," Eliza explained, though the warmth of the reception stirred memories of belonging that had occasionally seemed elusive on the reservation, where her acceptance, while genuine, always carried an element of exception rather than unquestioned inclusion. Their return created a minor sensation in the growing town. Former students, now young adults, sought out Eliza to share their progress and express gratitude for her teaching. Benjamin's craftsmanship was still evident in buildings throughout Pine Hollow, referenced with pride by current owners. Grace, old enough now to appreciate the significance of their family history, absorbed these encounters with thoughtful attention, piecing together the story of her parents' unusual beginning and the community that had embraced them despite convention. The legal matters were resolved efficiently under the supervision of Judge Foster's successor, a younger man who nonetheless approached the Wolfharmon family with the respect their history in Pine Hollow warranted. The Education Trust, when explained to Grace, sparked immediate questions about her future possibilities. "Could I attend a proper college?" she asked, eyes wide with the prospect. "Like the ones in Denver or even back east?" "If that's what you choose," Eliza assured her, sharing a glance with Benjamin that acknowledged the extraordinary nature of such an opportunity for a mixed-race girl from a reservation background. The funds would make it possible. This new horizon for their daughter prompted serious conversations during their remaining time in Pine Hollow. The reservation school, despite Eliza's dedicated efforts, could not provide the academic preparation Grace would need for higher education. Decisions loomed about where and how to continue her schooling as she approached her teenage years. "We could return to Pine Hollow," Benjamin suggested one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, echoing the conversations of years past. "The town has grown. There's work for both of us." Eliza considered the possibility thoughtfully. "And leave your mother, your position with the tribal council, the community we've built?" The complexity of their situation had no simple resolution. Their family had successfully bridged worlds, but the practical requirements of maintaining footings in both presented ongoing challenges. Grace's educational needs pulled in one direction, James's immersion in Cherokee culture, and Benjamin's tribal responsibilities in another, while Eliza's teaching called her to serve wherever the need was greatest. On their final evening in Pine Hollow, a surprise gathering was organized at the expanded schoolhouse. Former neighbors, students and friends assembled to share a meal and celebrate the Wolfharmon family's journey since leaving the town. Mrs. Rollins had evidently spread their story with characteristic embellishment, as several newer residents approached with barely contained curiosity about the legendary couple who had survived a blizzard and defied convention. Judge Foster, despite his frailty, attended briefly to present Eliza and Benjamin with an unexpected gift. The deed, too, a small parcel of land on Pine Hollow's outskirts. "I held it in trust," he explained, "hoping you might someday return, even partially. It's well situated, close enough for convenience, but private enough for peace." The gesture offered a potential solution to their dilemma. A foothold in Pine Hollow, where Grace could access better education while maintaining their primary residence on the reservation. A bridge between worlds, much like their family itself. As they prepared to depart the following morning, Grace paused on the platform of the train station that now stood where a simple platform had once deposited her pregnant mother in a deadly storm. "This is where it began," she said with the solemnity of a child grasping historical significance. "Where Mama was abandoned and Papa found her." "Not quite here," Benjamin corrected gently. "Many miles north at a much smaller station, but the same railroad, yes." Grace considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "So we're taking the same train that tried to harm Mama back to our home." "Full circle," Eliza murmured, struck by her daughter's perception. What was meant for harm became the start of something beautiful. The train that carried them back toward the reservation traveled the same tracks that had once been the site of careless cruelty, but now served as the connection between the different facets of their unusual family story. As mountains gave way to foothills and civilization thinned into wilderness once more, Eliza watched her children, Grace reading a book from Pine Hollow's new library, James sleeping peacefully against Benjamin's shoulder, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. Their future would continue to present challenges. Grace would eventually need to make choices about education that might take her far from the reservation. James would navigate his own path between heritage and opportunity. Benjamin's work with the tribal council would grow more complex as government policies toward native peoples evolved, and Eliza would continue her careful balance of teaching federal curriculum while preserving cultural knowledge the government sought to erase. Yet as the train carried them eastward, Eliza felt not anxiety, but a profound sense of rightness about the path they had forged. From the desperate night when she had stood abandoned on a snowy platform to this moment of purposeful journey with her family, every step, however difficult, however unexpected, had led to exactly where they were meant to be. The land in Pine Hollow would provide an anchor, a secondary home where Grace could eventually continue her education. The reservation would remain their primary residence, where James could absorb his Cherokee heritage and Benjamin could serve his people. And Eliza would continue to bridge these worlds, teaching in both places, maintaining the connections that sustained their unusual family. As the train rounded a bend, revealing a vista of mountains touched with the first hints of autumn color, Benjamin reached across to take Eliza's hand. No words were needed between them. The gesture contained their shared history, present commitment, and future possibilities. From strangers thrown together by crisis to partners in an extraordinary journey that transcended conventional boundaries, they had created something rare and precious. A family defined not by circumstance or convention, but by deliberate choice and unwavering dedication. The conductor, not the cruel man who had abandoned Eliza years ago, but a younger, more courteous employee of the reformed railroad, passed through their car, announcing the next station. Benjamin nodded acknowledgement while Eliza smiled at the symmetry. Once, a conductor's heartless decision had threatened everything. Now, another's simple courtesy facilitated their journey home. Grace looked up from her book, catching her mother's smile. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" "About journeys," Eliza replied, "about how the path forward isn't always clear, but moving forward with courage is what matters most." The child nodded with unexpected understanding before returning to her reading. Beside Eliza, Benjamin squeezed her hand gently, silently affirming the wisdom in her words. Outside the window, the wilderness rolled past, the same mountains, where they had once fought for survival, now serving as the backdrop for their family's continuing story. Different terrain lay ahead, new challenges and opportunities waiting to be navigated with the same determination that had carried them through blizzard, prejudice, and cultural divides. What had begun in desperation on a snowy night had blossomed into a legacy of bridge building, between cultures, between communities, between seemingly irreconcilable worlds. As the train carried them forward into that legacy's next chapter, Eliza felt not the chill of uncertainty, but the warmth of knowing they faced it together, their family's strength forged in the very storm that had once threatened to destroy. Everything full circle indeed, not ending where they began, but transforming difficulty into purpose, abandonment into belonging, and an accidental encounter into a deliberate, meaningful journey that would ripple through generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.